Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. I'm wwII, and in today's video I am starting a brand new series on the channel where I look at how I scout on different maps in World of Tanks console, and in this series I'll be using a variety of different light tanks from the Cold War and the World War II game mode, and as you can see in the first video today I'll be using the EBR 105, which is the French tier 10 wheeled light tank in the World War II game mode. But yes, I'll be using light tanks from both the World War II and the Cold War game mode, and I'll also be using maybe some of the medium tanks that like to play that light tank playstyle if you haven't got any light tanks on your team, or if your team needs vision. So in this series I'll be trying to give a rough guide on good locations to take your light tanks to try and spot and help your team, because I know a lot of new players struggle with scouting in World of Tanks console and find that light tanks are one of the hardest classes to play well and to have an impact in the game. And I find that the more experienced players and the exceptional players use light tanks, and they're extremely powerful at the start and at the end of the game, and they have a massive impact and they can carry the team. Obviously you have less hit points than most other tanks that you'll be coming up against, but you do have the advantage of having extra concealment on the move, and also in the cases of most light tanks, better mobility, better concealment, and usually good view range, but that's not the case for the EBR 105. So I'll be giving my idea on rough locations that aren't spawn dependent, meaning that it's positions that you can use coming from either kind of spawn depending on what kind of game it is, whether it's assault, whether it's team destruction, or whether it is an encounter battle. So here on El Halluf, which is the first map that we'll be looking at, you'll see that I have come at the start of this battle into the center of the map where this little village or little town is located, and this is a fantastic position to start off your scouting on El Halluf, because you are able to scout the south or the north depending on what spawn you spawn into. And at the start of the battle here I've just poked on this ridge using the EBR 105's fantastic concealment to look at the south of the map and get some juicy assistance at the start of this game. And if you use positions like that to get some assistance at the start of the game, you're having an impact from the get-go, and you are hopefully taking out a tank, or at least reducing and severely crippling a tank for your team later in the battle to take out. One thing about this position, as you can see here on El Halluf, is that you can bait people into stupidity coming to get you, and if you have a good line of fire like I do directly behind me and an artillery that is helping me out, you can get some lovely assistance at the start of the battle. And that Batchat thought that he could come over the ridge, come and take me out, but my teammates, with the assistance of my beautiful 105mm gun, mean that we take that Batchat out, and that's one tank less on the enemy's team for us to worry about. So this position can be used from pretty much any spawn on this map. It's a fantastic position to spot the north and the south, like I've said, but also you can spot tanks that are heading sort of towards the north, towards that brawling area in B4, B5. You can catch tanks out that come down into the sort of center of the map at the start of the battle, heading into position, and you can really catch them out. And yeah, you can spot them for your team. And if you have a good line of fire, like you usually do here, where people like to camp along the ridge lines in the south and the north of this map, you should be able to get some nice assistance at the start of the battle. And I'm just floating around this position because I know that there's still tanks up here, like this T-54, and he's had enough of my crap and he's coming after me. But we do have the superior mobility to hopefully try and avoid his shells, and we also have a good gun that we should be able to do nice chunking damage. And I'm just asking for assistance from my team, and my artillery helps me out with a fantastic shot on that T-54 that was on the move. Well, I say fantastic, it's fantastic for me, but kind of disgusting for that T-54. And we've already baited a few tanks over this ridgeline, meaning that we have had a great impact at the start of this battle. And once you've cleared out this sort of central area, you can push up even further to this ridgeline. Just peek, you'll usually find artillery located in the sort of J3, J4 area, or to the location just to the left of me over that ridge line, and it's a great opportunity to get some assistance, and your artillery might be able to do some great counter battery fire. Of course, It's helped in this replay by the fantastic concealment that the EBR 105 has, and I'll be telling you my crew and my equipment setup in just a little bit. But of course you can use this in different light tanks that have different concealment values, different view range values. You just have to choose your positions wisely in terms of how far you go forward or how far you sit back, and maybe use more bush mechanics if it's a slightly less concealed light tank, that kind of thing. And you just have to use your judgment, because this series is going to be a rough guide, and it's a lot of it is trial and error. You use this position, you might be able to find that you can go further forwards in EBR 105, use its concealment, but maybe in things like a Sheridan, perhaps a larger light tank, you might want to sit further back, stay in that little village area and use the hard cover should you need to fall back. But in a tank that has fantastic mobility like the EBR 105, or things like the Manticore in the World War II game mode, or like the BMP line in Cold War game mode, coming up here and being aggressive is a fantastic place to start. So we're already up to, what's that, 7.4k combined damage for this game, and it's still a fairly close game. We are up by 2 tanks, there's 2 artilleries per side, and we're still in this position. And I don't usually stay in this position the whole map when I'm scouting, but for the purposes of this video I just wanted to show this position and how useful it is. It might seem counterintuitive just to rush to the middle at the start of the battle, but you do have that ridge line and that little village to drop behind, and you usually have a pretty good gun line behind you to help you out. So I'm just trying to bait this tortoise in this particular replay over this ridge line in front of my team, and hoping that the artillery gets some good shots on him. And now I'm going to come up, I'm going to try and track the tortoise in position, so that if the artillery does manage to get a shot on him, I get the assistance. Unfortunately the tortoise moved forward, so we get a shot into his rear, and then we just circle round and we spot up the artillery and get the assistance for the Type 4 taking out the artillery. And now I'm just being an absolute pest. I'm coming up here, I know this tortoise is behind this rock, and if I get within 50 meters, I proximity spot the tortoise. So that's a great tactic to use. You don't have to necessarily get within sort of line of sight of a tank. You can get within 50 meters and you will automatically spot the enemy tank, but be aware that you also do get spotted yourself within that 50-meter proximity range. And now it's just a case of cleaning up, because we've had that impact at the start of the battle, and now we can use our mobility and our concealment at the end of the battle to try and get shots in to this Conqueror gun carriage, finish the artillery off. Having a bit of problems with the gun depression there, but it looks like that Conqueror gun carriage is doing a very typical arty thing of just staying in his sniper mode and not trying to shotgun me. So we're going to gladly oblige with the kill on that Conqueror gun carriage, finishing that game off. So that one was a victory on Halluf there. We finish in second place with 1 kill, 4k direct damage, 4.7k assistance, make a small profit. And that's only a second class for the EBR 105, showing you how well people play this tank. So we're going to head on now into the second replay, which is a game on Prokhorovka in the EBR 105, and I'll show you just how much of an impact you can do dealing only a few shots of damage and using assistance to push up your XP. So we're going to see you there shortly. So we're now on Prokhorovka in the EBR 105, and this is the light tank's wet dream. This map is the best light tank map, in my opinion, in the game. You can have extraordinary spotting assistance numbers on this map, especially in a tank that has as good concealment as the EBR 105 and as good mobility as a tank like the EBR 105. And you have a fantastic opportunity to influence the battle purely by your spotting. In this match in particular, I hardly fire my gun and do any damage, direct damage that is. It's mainly assistance damage, and you can see how powerful the EBR 105 can be at active spotting, but also passive spotting when I'm sitting on these ridge lines, completely oblivious to the enemies because my concealment is so good. And before we get into talking about the positions on the map, I will tell you my equipment and commander setup. So with the EBR 105, I run advanced optics, advanced concealment and gun stabilizer for the equipment. And in terms of my commander skills, I run Sixth Sense, Born Leader, Rapid Loading, Situational Awareness, Steady Aim, Snapshot, Run and Gun, camouflage expertise, and muffled shot. That setup gives me a still concealment value of 229 meters, which is absolutely insane in the World War II game mode. It means that I am going to be nearly invisible for a lot of tanks, depending on how aggressively they push. My view range is 461 meters, which isn't fantastic. That's one of the downsides to the EBR 105. But like I said in the previous gameplay on El Halluf, this sort of mini series that I'm going to be doing on positions to scout in World of Tanks console isn't intended to be a really in-depth guide on spotting in World of Tanks console. This is going to be positions that you can use in pretty much every light tank, and general sort of locations that you might want to try and go into there and sort of use your different tanks' capabilities. So if you have a really stealthy tank, you can play more aggressively, you can play more passively, sit in bushes, that kind of thing. Or if you're a really highly mobile big tank, you can go forward, be actively spotting on ridge lines, making yourself hard to hit, and then falling back and using hard cover. It's obviously a trial and error thing depending on the tank that you're playing, but the more you play that tank, the more you get to know it. And do make notes of your still concealment values and your view range, and just sort of trial and error. Use the bush mechanics, which means that when you are trying to spot in a bush, you go forward so the bush is completely transparent. That means that you're able to have the full extent of your view range. And when you want to fire, you pull back behind the bush, make sure that the bush is kind of opaque, and that means that you will be retaining all of the bush's concealment bonus and giving you the less chance of being spotted when you do fire. Of course, you do have to have a backup in mind. If you do get lit up, you don't want to be one of those light tank drivers that's just sat out with their sixth sense gone off, and they're just sat there, they're being detected, and they're just sat in a bush getting absolutely annihilated, because with light tanks you have less hit points and your hit points don't go as far, obviously. And yeah, you want to keep those hit points for the later stages of the battle to be more aggressive and to push your view range out. So here, as you can see on Prokhorovka, you can see that I've used the center line, the E line, to spot out at the start of the battle the enemy that are getting into position. That's a great indication of where the enemies are going. It gives you an idea where there might be vulnerabilities in the enemy's defenses later on, but also where you might want to retreat and defend the cap circle depending on what kind of game mode you are playing. I got some early assistance early on. However, I had to retreat slightly a couple of ridge lines back because all of my teammates were sort of stuck on that train track in A6, B6 on the map. As you can see, they are still there, but it did give me a nice line of defense, meaning that when I was spotting the tanks, they were shooting and I am getting assistance. And here I am actively scouting. I'm using my mobility to try and make my appearances when I do pop up on these ridge lines different every single time to make sure people can't predict where I am going. I'm just trying to keep the enemy tanks lit. As you can see, I do run combat rations. That just boosts my view range that little bit more, my gun handling, that kind of thing, and it just means that I'm able to be a more effective scout. And here you can see the fantastic concealment of the EBR 105. There was no bush directly in front of me. I'm sat up on a ridge line. I'm able to fire at that Death Star without getting spotted at about sort of 275 to 280 meters. However, there is a Jagdpanzer E100 looking this way, so as soon as I get lit, I am going to be ducking down into cover. And here you can see the ability of the EBR 105 to passive scout. I'm just sat on this ridge line. I'm not even using the bush mechanics and it's working for me. But as soon as I get spotted, I want to make sure that I'm in a position to head off down the ridge line and get out of harm's way. And if you're in a tank that isn't a wheeled vehicle like the EBR 105 and maybe it's slow in reverse, you want to think about reversing into a location so that when you do get spotted, you can go forward with the full capability of your engine power. And those are the kinds of things that you need to sort of trial and error of different tanks and think about. But I will leave that up to you. This is a rough guide and it's locations that you might want to start off with if you're a new player and you're new to scouting and locations that have worked for me in the past, they still work for me now, and hopefully it gives you a little bit of an indication, a little bit of a sort of guide into scouting. And if you want to sort of look at a channel where there's an exceptional light tank player, look no further than the Turkey Tank. It's listed in my video description. I'm not sure if he longer plays with the Tanks console, but he was an exceptional light tank player. Go watch his channel on YouTube. There are so many replays where you can pick up so many different locations and fantastic tips on how to use the light tanks in WoT of Tanks console. So at the end of the battle, you're seeing the capabilities of light tanks with the mobility and the view range. When there's less tanks, when there's more gaps in the enemy's defences, I'm able to be more aggressive. I'm able to be the first ones to spot and get all that juicy assistance, and you can see that lovely assistance damage racking up. So we've only done 120 direct damage, but we've done just shy of 12k assistance, and we get the final shell there into the artillery, finishing him off, having a fantastic game, a great impact by not firing our gun. Well, we fired our gun, but we didn't do much direct damage at all. So we finished that game with the first class medal in the EBR 105 patrol duty as well. We finished in the MVP slot with 11.7k assistance, 2 kills and 346 direct damage, making a small profit again. And one thing to note in terms of the commander skills, there is that silent driving perk that you can use, but it doesn't work on light tanks, so be wary. Don't use that on your light tanks, because your light tanks already have a bonus concealment factor when you are moving. So I hope that this video was useful to you and you picked up some tips on how to scout on Halluf and Prokhorovka. I will probably touch on these maps again in the future in different tanks, but this series is just going to be short videos with good gameplay, hoping to try and give a few rough tips on where to go and guides on where to go in your light tanks and how to maybe have better games if you are struggling. And if you aren't struggling, maybe you'll be able to pick up some different locations that I use later down this series, or maybe just enjoy watching the gameplay in the light tanks. So that's all for today's video. I hope you enjoyed these two games in the EBR 105 on Halluf and on Prokhorovka, and until next time, I'll see you on the battlefield, and bye for now.